Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we're going to recap the Orioles offseason in part one of our interview with Andy Kotska and Danielle Allentuck of the Baltimore Banner. We'll introduce Andy and Danielle in just a moment. But first, as we like to do at the top of all of our episodes, we have a few new members to welcome to our Patreon community. And with that, I will turn it over to Bob.
I actually think, first of all, yes, thank you, new patrons. I think I shouted out Keel McLaughlin last week, but he officially went from free trial to official supporter. So there you go again. And another new one is listed as DB Boy, keeping it a mystery, but thank you for joining up. We appreciate it. And if anyone wants to be a patron, please sign up. Even if not, join our Discord. We have a Top Series 1 opens up next tomorrow, and we're doing a box break of that. So spring training, baseball cards, it's all happening.
We'll look now back at an offseason that was busy, not just in terms of on-field moves, but things that are going to happen off the field that are going to affect the future of the Orioles. And to look at that, we're going to be joined by two of the best reporters in Birdland, Andy Kotska and Danielle Allentuck of the Baltimore Banner. Andy, Danielle, great to have you both back on.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So let's start with this question, which is that this offseason was chaotic in the sense that it started out very slow before 1 week essentially delivered an offseason's worth of news. As we gear up for spring training, what are the most pressing questions on your minds?
I think first thing that comes into my mind is probably the fourth outfielder, which might not be the sexiest question on my mind, but it is, kind of an open competition between Colton Cowser, Heston Kjerstad, Ryan McKenna, Sam Hilliard. The list goes on. Kyle Stowers. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Tyler Nevin.
Yeah, Tyler Nevin. The list kind of goes on and on of who can be in that group. So we'll see. I mean, a lot of it's going to come down to spring training competition and whether Jorge Mateo can play in center field consistently.
Mine is more on off the field stuff. It's kind of when is the sale going to be finalized and how is it going to impact the team and how soon is it going to impact this team. There's still a couple steps to go. They still have to bring it to an owner's vote. But I don't think things are going to be instant once the owner's vote has been approved. But I think that we're going to see a gradual change and there may be a lot of differences by the end of the year versus where there are now, depending on when the sale gets approved.
Yeah, that is a great point. I mean, they announced 7 spring training games. How different is that going to be next year once the new ownership is completely in control? Is Masson even going to be under control of the Orioles? So yeah, so much to find out. So so interesting. Yeah, please just nuke it. I don't care.
So that's actually a perfect segue there to the next question we had was with this new ownership group coming in. I think a lot of fans instantly thought, spend more, spend more, spend more. You look at the list of free agents, even like Orioles are reporting to camp in like hours, and you look at the free agent team you could put together, could probably compete in like the AL Central this year. I feel like still at this point, but obviously this is going to be a little bit slower process other than instant over the next couple of weeks. What are some maybe more realistic expectations I think fans can look forward to once this sale does go through?
Yeah, and I do kind of want to point out here the two most recent teams to get sold, the Mets and the Orioles, took very different approaches in how they operated after new owners. I mean, the Mets went all in, spent a bunch of money, made a bunch of trades, and it completely tanked on them. And they ended up losing a ton of money and selling off a bunch of those players, essentially. And he has the Orioles, who were sold only a couple months before the Mets, and they took it very gradually. And you didn't really see them start spending money until this offseason. And I kind of feel like the Orioles may go that track. Like, I don't think we're going to see Rubenstein come in and spend a bunch of money. I think we're going to see them kind of gradually improve, especially because they have, the base right now. And they don't need to go out and spend a ton of money right away when they have all these top players. So what I think we may start seeing is maybe extensions. I mean, we've started seeing Austin Hayes last week speaking openly for the first time about, wanting to stay in Baltimore. I think those are sort of smaller extensions, maybe a smaller long-term deal would be the first steps before we start seeing the bigger moves.
Yeah, I mean, Oh, go ahead, Andy.
No, yeah, John Angelos is still the control person until the deal goes through. So it wasn't going to happen overnight. When the deal was announced as something that had been agreed to, And Danielle's right. I don't think it's going to overnight become a Yankees payroll.
I was going to say, I think Orioles fans would be happy with the Bobby Witt type extension for one of the young guys, whether it's Adley, Gunnar, Jackson, Kobe, whoever. But yeah, I think I agree with you guys there. My question is also a little bit to do with ownership because it's kind of top of mind, but combine that with the Corbin Burnes trade. Looking at Corbin Burnes specifically, do you think an ownership change could do anything to affect his chances of staying in Baltimore beyond this offseason? And was the timing of the trade like days after the ownership thing? Was that coincidental, as Michael Elias said, or do you think that was tied in a little bit together? Andy?
Yeah, I'll stick with what Mike Elias said. He was, very clear that it was a coincidental incident, the timing of the trade. It was a matter of, they had looked at Corbin Burnes all offseason, just as they had looked at so many different pitchers, from including basically every single 29 teams they talked to, Mike Elias said. So I think it was more of a coincidence that it happened right after the new ownership. The new ownership came into place. But to the first part of the question of whether that helps, potentially signing Corbin Burnes to a long-term deal, I still think, he's probably going to test the open market. He said that when he was with Milwaukee, that he was kind of looking forward to free agency in that respect. He's a Scott Boras client. They tend to test the open market. But I think, compared to what it is now, when David Rubenstein and that group comes together, you have to figure that the chances of signing a player of Corbin Burnes' pedigree to a long-term deal has to be better than it currently was under the current ownership group. That latter part, of course, is conjecture on my part, but you figure it's better when you add a group of three billionaires heading an ownership group taking control.
He summed it up completely. I agree. The one advantage that the Orioles have now compared to other teams is they will have a head start on negotiating an extension. It doesn't necessarily mean that he'll be willing to listen earlier, but they at least have, that advantage going into it.
And Adley hugs don't hurt.
Yes.
Danielle, I saw the podcast, the live episode you did with Paul Mancano last week, taking a look at Corbin Burnes. And what struck me was that when the two of you were talking about possible salary, Garrett Cole was the first pitcher that came up. And I was conflicted at first because I'm looking at Blake Snell still sitting here as pitchers and catchers are about to report, not having a big contract yet. It does feel like Burnes would be the closest thing we've seen to Garrett Cole on the free agent market since Cole signed with the Yankees before the 2020 season. So do you think that that's probably going to be the ceiling or the floor, maybe, of where negotiations for him would start?
I would think so. I would think they'd probably even start higher than that. Think before 2020, that was 4 years ago at this point. I think that they're going to aim much higher than that and kind of maybe that be their fallback. He's definitely going to be looking for a long-term deal because who isn't nowadays? And it's going to be multi-million. If the Orioles were to sign him, it definitely would be one of the biggest contracts, if not the biggest contract in team history. So I think that they're going to be asking for the moon, and then they may fall back. Compared to Blake Snell, we don't know what's going on there. I don't have any insight there, but I would think Corbin would be, asking for everything and just seeing what people say back.
Danielle, sticking with you here and focusing on off-the-field news that almost happened but didn't this offseason. You and Hallie Miller, your colleague at the Banner, confirmed a report this week that the Wall Street Journal had reported recently that the Orioles were close to a deal with T. Rowe Price to sell naming rights to Camden Yards. It would have been T. Rowe Price Park at Camden Yards. You report in the story would have been a 10-year deal, but the abrupt announcement of the ownership change seemingly has put a halt to that. Is there any telling at this point of how the new ownership group could affect naming rights, whether it's with T. Rowe Price, another sponsor, or no one at all?
So everything is paused until the sale is finalized. So it doesn't mean that this deal won't be picked up again once that happens. It doesn't mean that they won't necessarily go out and try to find a sponsor of their own and negotiate their own deal. But all it means is that right now that deal has currently paused or not necessarily falling through. It's just not happening at the moment. Rubenstein's people have declined to comment on whether they would pursue something similar in the future.
There's a reason MLB's in a rush to get the sale finalized too, I guess.
Pivoting back to on-field moves here to kind of wrap up a look back at the offseason and Corbin Burns specifically, just how much better does he make this rotation? When you look at how the season ended last year for the Orioles and to what they're going into this year, what kind of impact are we going to expect to see with Burns added to that starting five there?
I think he's a clear number one in the rotation. You add that with, knock on wood, everyone else is healthy. You don't necessarily know the health of the rest of the rotation as spring training continues and opening day arrives. But as on paper at the moment, what you have here is Kyle Bradish and Grayson Rodriguez finished the year as two of the best pitchers in the game. You add them to this rotation with Corbin Burns at the head of it. Now you have this kind of like three-headed monster that you feel great about going into a postseason series. A lot of games between then and the postseason, but you still think of just the pedigree of a Corbin Burns with, even a 3.5 ERA or whatever he had last year, being a tiny bit more elevated than they had in 2022. What he was able to do midway through the season, I was reading pitcher list and they showed how, midway through the season, he changed his slider and took away some miles per hour, added sweep to it about, just making it a little bit more of a sweeper, which is something the Orioles love, a sweeper. So that added a huge boost to his season. And that suddenly that pitch had like a 50% whiff rate compared to 38% earlier in the year. So, great work from pitcher list to kind of dive into that. But those are the things that you're adding a pitcher that can do that to his game and knows how to, finagle his pitches to make them their best version of themselves. But also at the same time, he might be able to add a veteran mind to the other guys in the rotation that really haven't spent that much time in major leagues, all things considered. Bradish, Grayson, Tyler Wells, Dean Kramer, they're young guys. So he's a big boost. Again, health is key, as TJ Lighton commented. You have to bank on everyone being healthy in the rotation. But if that is the case, you have to like what you see from this O's rotation and Burns at the head of it could be quite the table setter for every 5 days.
It also, to me, like if you look back at the playoffs from last year, and of course you never know what would have happened if they had Corbin last year, but you'd think he would have been their game one starter. Kyle, did okay in game one, but you would have to think that Corbin may have, with that much more experience he has in his career, may have been able to handle the pressure a little bit better. So maybe you had a better start in game one. You had Bradish game two, Greats in game three, Dean Kramer, your bullpen. The whole series could have been different if you had that start in game one. And that's really what made them fall apart last year at the end.
Do either of you, because I think most people kind of are looking at this roster and penciling in a rotation of Burns, Bradish, Grayson, Means, and Kramer, but do either of you think there's going to be any real competition for that final spot that might involve Kramer and Cole Irvin and Tyler Wells? We know Tyler Wells has shown that can be successful as a starter. Cole Irvin showed pretty noticeable improvements down the stretch last year, but is there going to be like a big time battle there, or do we think Irvin and Wells are more likely destined for bullpen options, at least to start the year?
I think the question for me is not necessarily is there going to be a competition, it's where are they going to assign Wells. I think that, Wells is probably a stronger pitcher than Kramer, but the question for me is he a strong enough pitcher to last the whole season while Kramer has proved that he can do that? So I think that to me is more where the Orioles are going to place him and how early in spring training are they going to make that decision.
Yeah, that's a big consideration. I'm on the Tyler Wells hype train. Have been for a while. I think his stuff is great. If he's healthy, he's in the rotation, in my opinion. Of course, I don't make decisions. Mike Elias does. So we'll see about that. But I do think the first half of Tyler Wells' season was phenomenal, and even when he came back in the bullpen was also phenomenal. So whichever position he lands in, whether they decide, as Danielle points out, if they could decide earlier in spring to say, hey, Tyler, you're going to be a phenomenal 7th inning, 8th inning guy, whatever it is, setup guy, that can work. But I do think his stuff is too good, and that first half of the season was too good to not really consider him for the fifth starter position. Plus, I mean, we're banking on John Means being fully healthy. All indications are that he's fully healthy, but things pop up. Maybe he's not as stretched out as he'd like to be. Who knows? We'll see in spring. I think everyone has penciled in the rotation that you mentioned of Burns, Bradish, Grayson, John Means, and Dean Kramer. But I wouldn't be so sure of that rotation, especially the back end of it. John Means probably is in it, but with that fifth spot, I mean, Dean Kramer could be a long guy too. You could have, as you said, Cole Irvin was really improved the latter half of the season as a relief pitcher. So who knows exactly what his offseason, what kind of strides he might have taken. But, Tyler Wells, I think sees himself as a starter, although is 100% willing to be a reliever if they need him to be. So I think it'll be an open competition for at least the first month or so. But that's another big consideration heading into spring.
I'm also not discounting them pulling out a 6-man rotation at times.
Yeah.
Because that did show to really help the health of their pitchers in the second half. And, they have the options to do it now.
That's a good point. I wonder if they could design Tyler Wells to be a starter in the first half and a reliever in the second half and make it a little bit of a smoother transition if they expect him to, tire out a little bit in the second half. But I had a follow-up to this Corbin Burns again is, even if he's only here for 1 year, what kind of impact do you think he could make to the young pitchers that'll be sticking around? I know Bradish and Kramer specifically have modeled their game after Corbin Burns. They've said that in the past. And Grayson, another potential ace, maybe could they learn a pitch grip or just, how to prepare themselves the right way? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. Just with Bradish there, we saw him. He shifted. He stood more on the third base side of the rubber, I think it was. Instead of the first base side because he watched Corbin Burns do it. And that helped him immensely in 2022. So they will pick it up watching a guy like that every fifth day, even if they never speak to him, which they will speak to him. They'll speak to him a lot and pick his brain. But even if they never spoke to him and they watched him 5 times a week, 5 times a week, that'd be a lot. Every fifth day. They will pick up a lot. So I think, a huge benefit. You saw what Jordan Lyles and Kyle Gibson did for this rotation. And nothing against them. They're great pitchers, phenomenal mentors. But a pitcher of Burns's caliber could, even bring more.
I also think, really stood out to me. Corbin was just doing a Zoom. Obviously, reporters, it wasn't the same as getting to know him in a clubhouse like we will soon. But he did make it a point to say that, he's at the point in his career where he really does want to help give back. So I think he's going to lean into that and really be a mentor to these younger guys.
Very cool. All right. Let's see. I wrote this question myself. Were the Orioles smart to jump the market on relievers at the winter meetings by signing Craig Kimbrell before free agency basically fell asleep? And while he's not Felix Bautista, because who is, how do you see him doing this year, stepping into the closer's role?
To answer the first part of the question, I don't know how much the Orioles care about this, but I think that it at least alleviated some of the pressure to make a major move, knowing that they had done something early on. Nobody knew how slow this free agent market would have been this year. Elias even said that he's not even quite sure why it is, and it's a lot of speculation that maybe it's because, the industry of RSNs right now, not a lot of people knew if they could rely on that money. That hasn't quite been proven yet either, but I think it at least just got something on their to-do list out of the way, and it could, move on to focus to trying to get a starter.
Yeah, they definitely, they checked off something big, pretty immediately, which helped with focusing on a starting pitcher. Bob, what was the latter half of that question, if you don't mind?
How do you think he's going to do, Craig Kimbrell? I know Philadelphia fans will say, "Oh, terrible signing," but do you think he can hold down the closer's role and allow some other guys to, like Dylan Tate, Danny Coulombe, and Yunior Cano and all them, to just handle the more high leverage stuff?
Yeah, it'll be really interesting. I wouldn't say it's a lock that he is the closer. I think, Mike Elias said he's the closer, so that carries more weight than what I think. But I wouldn't be, shocked if there is any sort of, rumbling in his game in the spring. You have Yennier Cano, you have Dylan Tate, both have closing experience. Yennier with like 8 saves last year, and Tate maybe 5 in 2022. Someone can fact check me on those two. But, so you have guys, and Danny Coulomb, probably not a closer, but, another high leverage arm that you can rely on. So I don't know if the pressure is necessarily there that you have to run Craig Kimbrell out for every last inning. That's his expectation, I'm sure. He's a future Hall of Famer, probably. Has 417 saves in his career, and is proven that he has the makeup for that kind of role in a pitching staff. But if he kind of continues what he did in the postseason, which was fresh on Philly fans' minds, of I think it was 4 runs in 2 games, and a blown save, in there. So was a difficult postseason for him. But the rest of the season pitched well. Still saved a bunch of games. He's still a very high quality pitcher at a reasonable rate. $13 million guaranteed if the O's $12 million in 2024 plus a $1 million buyout in 2025 if they don't pick up a club option. So reasonable rate, and probably the closer will probably be just fine. No Felix Bautista, nobody is, but I think he just gives the Orioles another late inning option beyond a Dylan Tate and a Yennier Cano that you can mix and match in those big game positions. I don't necessarily think he has to be 100% of the time a closer, but definitely is a good arm.
Andy, I'm going to disagree with you because this is the Orioles we're talking about, and they spent $13 million on him. They're not going to just have him be a regular reliever. He's going to be their closer as much as possible, as many nights as they can get out of him. I mean, they didn't just pay that much money for him to pitch every couple of days when needed. To me, he's their closer until they absolutely give him a reason why he's not.
Danielle, this is the Rubenstein Orioles now. You can't just assume
Not yet. No, it's still the Angelos Orioles until MLB votes otherwise.
Fair enough.
Do either of you think we could see another move, even if it's a small move, between now and opening day? Or do you think that the 26-man roster is going to come from the group of players that the Orioles are carrying into Sarasota?
I think we see them pick up a reliever or two along the way. I mean, they picked up Danny Coulomb like 2 nights before opening day or something like that last year. I wasn't here, so don't quite remember the timing of that one exactly. But I think that there will be some kind of Ryer low ball trade that will happen later on in spring training, especially as they kind of evaluate where the bullpen is at. And don't just kind of they could make a trade early in season. They could do more Ryer pickups early in season. Elias has proven that's something that he is very willing to do. So I would not be surprised if another player or two is added.
I see the comment for a trade for DJ Stewart was hilarious, but no, I think Danielle's correct. Mike Elias loves a waiver wire pickup, or and this pitching coaching staff. I know it's a little bit new of a pitching coach, and bullpen coach has been shuffled around a little bit, but they have a track record, the O's, of kind of reclamation projects. So I'd imagine, pick up some reliever, give him an opportunity, and who knows, maybe you find another Yennier Cano.
Were either of you shocked to see, going back to Corbin Burns thing as we kind of wrap up part 1 here, but were either of you shocked that the trade for the starter, maybe just shocked initially that there was a trade for a starter, but that this specific trade was for what's likely going to be a rental in Corbin Burns and not a bigger deal for maybe someone that has more controllable, like a Dylan Cease? So it seems like the White Sox not quite sure what they seem to be doing, planning for over there, but any surprise there that wasn't for a Cease-like arm instead with the extra years of control?
So my surprise, sorry, Andy.
No,
my surprise is really random for the trade. I was surprised he traded a draft pick. Not that he traded for Corbin Burns for a year, not that he got rid of DL Hall. It's that he was willing to part with a beloved draft pick, and obviously they can get one back later on by offering him a contract later. But that part really shocked me that he was willing to part with that.
Maybe they bank on Jackson Holiday winning Rookie of the Year and they get a draft pick that way. I don't know, but yeah, I mean that's a good point. The draft pick, Mike Elias, has proven that you can really those competitive, I guess whatever those are called, like the 34th pick of the draft. Those can reap huge rewards, and Gunnar was in that territory. So I was not really surprised at all that they traded for a starter. I mean, that was their number one goal. Figured it would happen one way or another. I didn't know if they were going to go for a lower level starter, some guy a little, a tier below a Corbin Burns or a Dylan Cease, just for a lesser price. But honestly, the price for Corbin Burns was reasonable. If you think about it, they didn't have to give up, the top 5 prospects or whatever it is on the Baseball America rankings. Joey Ortiz, bright future ahead of him. DL Hall could be a phenomenal reliever or starter. But this is the kind of trade that, John Mioli, I think, said it best, our columnist, the banner. Like, this is the trade that contending teams have to make. And at a certain point, you have to kind of bite the bullet and give up guys that have team control and bright futures. But they did it in a way that they did it responsibly, in a way that you didn't give up a Kobe Mayo or a Samuel Basayo, a Jackson Holiday. Obviously, you weren't going to give up, but like those names, you didn't necessarily have to give up. Colton Cowser could still be, a large part of this team in the future, and you didn't have to give him up. So same with Heston. There's a lot of guys that could have been on the asking price for teams that. Honestly, I think Kobe Mayo could be playing third base at some point for the O's this season. So you kind of avoided a major loss of that respect. DL will hurt a little bit, but they have other left-handers. I wouldn't even be shocked if Nick Vespi with that one seam fastball he has now give a little bit of arm side run compared to his sweep. Maybe he comes in as a surprise southpaw out of the bullpen. We'll see, but I think it was honestly a pretty fair trade for both teams. I think both teams had to be happy with it.
Yeah, it was definitely my takeaway was definitely that was a win-win, especially if Ortiz and Hall pan out. It's a win-win trade. I loved it. Best of luck to both of those guys.
Yeah, the most interesting comments from Elias were that he said he actually thinks they should be able to trade more draft picks, and I just thought it was interesting that they can agree on the value of a draft pick, can't necessarily agree on the value of a player. That was pretty good. We don't usually get into controversial topics here, but this just had to be broached. Andy, you tweeted something. There was a story about the new drink carrier that's coming in to Camden Yards. Coke or Pepsi?
Neither. I don't bother with soda. I'm a ginger ale guy if I drink any soda. So I'm going straight down the middle.
The coldest take I've ever heard in my life. Danielle?
Definitely Coke. Diet Coke specifically. Diet Dr. Pepper if they have it. A little inside baseball for you guys. The Rangers Stadium, best stadium soda machine.
These are the things I would not be able to tell you. Yeah, I've never tried the soda machine at Ranger Stadium. So
they have Diet Dr. Pepper with flavors in it. It's a wonderful time.
I will fly down to go watch a game there to get the flavored Dr. Pepper. So I'm sold.
We'll wrap this part up here with this, which is, was there a move that you expected or thought that the Orioles should have made this offseason that they didn't?
So this is exactly what I thought they were going to do. That they were going to sign a closer and they were going to trade for a pitcher. I think that they could have, gone out and got another bat. Maybe they could have, done a couple other smaller wire pickups to help with the bullpen, but I still do believe those are coming. But at the bare minimum, this is what the Orioles needed, and that's what they did. So I didn't expect much else this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. They didn't need to overhaul, using favorite phrases of Mike Elias. They needed to augment the roster, not overhaul it. That's what they did. They replaced the best way they could, Felix Bautista, and then added a frontline starter. So check both boxes and, kind of move on from there and think that your players will either meet what they did in 2023 or surpass those levels. Westberg might be even better than he was in 23, and then you just have to hope Gunnar Henderson does the same thing he did in 23, except for the slow start, but basically the same thing. And you should be in a pretty good shape by the end of it.
We'll take a deeper dive into that in part 2 of our interview with Andy and Danielle, which will be available later this week for those of you who are listening to this on our podcast feed. If you're watching live, just stay on the stream because we're going to continue our conversation in just a moment. Orioles on the Verge is part of the Believe Podcast Network. You can find us on Facebook, Threads, Instagram, X, TikTok, and at Substack at oriolesontheverge.substack.com. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge.